The next quality we want to talk about is the quality of peace. And we have to understand that we're not talking about low energy, because one of the qualities we're also going to talk about is energy. We're not talking about sinking below the level of awareness where we're just not even putting out enough energy to feel bad. Because sometimes people can mistake lethargy for peace. So you're not really peaceful, you've just given up the effort and have shut your awareness down to the point where you're not suffering anymore. That's why if you ask people, are you happy? Most people will say, yeah, I'm happy. No. But it's not happy, or it's not on the dynamic level that is really fulfilling to us. And that doesn't have to be outward, but it's an inward level of it's a very high vibration. That's what I'm wanting to say. So the quality of peace we're talking about, is the quality, thinking it through, it's the quality of self-acceptance is what I really think that peace, that's where peace comes from, which is I've done everything that I can, and it is what it is. You see, all of these are also laced with faith. You can see how they're all involved with each other. I've been involved for the last several years in the responsibilities that I have in a very confusing situation in which there's a lot at stake. I have been struggling with it to be at peace with the situation for a number of years while it has been going on, and as I progress through the different levels of introspection and of experience, I've gradually come to realize that what causes me not to be at peace with it is the idea that I could do more. Or maybe I've made a mistake, and if I were only different. And so if there's an agitation in the heart, and then there's an agitation in the mind. The agitation in the mind always starts in the heart. But if we know that God is in charge, that I've done everything I can, or maybe I've made a terrible mess of it, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. One of my favorite mantras is, it seemed like a good idea at the time, because it always does, or else we wouldn't do it. And to be able to be at peace with who we are and how we've lived, including all of the mistakes that we've made, which if we're thoughtful at all, we're going to find out that there's a lot of them. One of the things that the masters tell us over and over again that happens when realization comes is we realize that it was always the divine acting through us. We were always just instruments, whether we knew it or not, just moving through the karma that has to be moved through, doing the best we can, learning the lessons that we have to learn. Some of the most moving lessons I've had about these qualities have come from my dying friends. When you know as many people as I do for as many years as you do, you sort of stack up a lot of people who've died. And everybody dies sooner or later, so it's not a question of whether, it's a question of how. In fact, there's a wonderful book called Transitions in Grace, which is a story of about 20-some people who have passed on into the next level of their existence, who were either meditating yogis or associated with someone. So that was an influence. And one of the things that is in the introduction to that book is this statement: yoga and meditation has been highly touted for how it can improve the way you live, but people are only just beginning to understand how it can improve the way you die, which is a very important thing to learn. So I'm going to use another example. This woman, her name was Brinde, and she'd had a very tumultuous life, very difficult upbringing. Herself became a very committed alcoholic, and in the course of many years of alcoholism, gave birth, I believe, to 3 or 4 children and was never capable of raising any of them. So they were all raised by others. I think 2 of them came out well, 1 of them didn't. But she couldn't hold the marriages and she couldn't hold the motherhood. But somewhere in there, she found the spiritual path and became very devoted to it. And then soon after, she was part of it. She left for many years. She came back And then after she was well established again, she had a terminal cancer. But she was following, by then she was sober and she was following the steps. And she did her best to reconcile with her children. And one or two of them reconciled with her, two of them, one couldn't be found, I think. One refused, two reconciled with her. But here was the most remarkable thing about it. She was just at peace. And it's hard to think of circumstances that would weigh on your conscience more than what she was describing. But she was able to see it in a big enough picture that she'd realized she'd done everything she could, given who she was, and that God himself does not ask more of us. In a humorous way, Jyotish and Devi tell this story. Jyotish is Swami Kriyananda's appointed successor. His wife Devi, the two of them serve as the worldwide leaders. There was some person in the community, they told this from years ago, and he was sort of a difficult person, and they were sort of having a discussion about that man, and Swami said, well, I think he's doing really well. And then he qualified it by saying, considering who he is, which, if you actually think about it, how else can you measure someone? You can't measure everyone against Jesus Christ because we're not. This woman she was single and she very much wanted to be married. And she read about how if you want to manifest something, you should write out a very exact description of what you're trying to manifest. So she wrote 3 or 4 pages of the husband she wanted to attract. And for some reason, she thought it was a good idea to share this with Swami Kriyananda, so she did. He read all her pages, and then he looked at her and he said, my dear, you want to marry Jesus Christ. And then he said, and Jesus would not marry you. And then he said, and you would not be happy with Jesus. You need someone a little closer to your own level. That's how he put it to her. So she wrote 2 things. She wanted a husband who loved God and who had a sense of humor. And she got a husband who loved God, who has a sense of humor, and God had a sense of humor because he was born on Christmas Day. Now, going back to, he's doing very well considering who he is, Now, there's so much wisdom in that. There really is. We just can't be what we're not. And if we torture ourselves thinking I need to be somebody else, we're also insulting the divine. God doesn't make junk, as they say. He made me the way I am, and this is the way I am. So later, Jyotish and Devi were asking Swamiji, had become concerned because of an incident that they weren't sure they had handled it properly. They were asking him, are we competent in the jobs you've given us? Oh, he said, I think you're doing very well. And with a twinkle in his eye, he said, considering who you are. Which made everybody laugh. But that's really what we're working with. We will never be at peace if we're going to wait for everything to be perfect. Because it is perfect, not in the way we think of perfection. We think of perfection as that everything is in order and nothing goes wrong. The way God thinks of perfection is that we're all doing the best we can considering who we are. That we're facing in the right direction, and even if in this moment we're not moving, we're contemplating our next step, we're just going to keep trying. And when we can come to peace, to self-acceptance of this is the karma I have to face, and I may not get through it with 100%. Last night, I think I was talking about a situation that I've had to deal with, and I wrote to some friends. I said, it could have gone better, but it also could have gone worse. So I give myself about a C on an A through F scale. I give myself about a C. which says I didn't fail completely, but considering who I am, I did better than I might have. And then you can just begin to let it go. And every time I feel anxiety about other situations I'm dealing with, that I should be able to do more, well, no, actually you can't. You're doing very well, considering who you are. So we have to just always keep looking at everything and also understand what we have to work on. We think we have to work on our skills, but skill is kind of an odd thing because we just can't be better than we are. We have to work on our sincerity. And this is how Swami put it to me also, because I used to feel that I could use my cleverness and my willpower to persuade people of things they weren't ready to hear. Seemed like a good idea at the time. That's the only thing I can say. And there was a circumstance in which this gentleman, who I thought was receptive to what I wanted to tell him, so I explained things to him that I thought would be helpful to him, and he was totally offended, to the point where he called Swamiji and told him that I really should be removed from public view because I was a menace to the well-being of the people around me. And this is the fun of living in community. Okay? And so Swami knew all the players well enough to suspect that perhaps the man had overreacted, but he also knew that I probably wasn't innocent. You know? So he sort of presented to me what had been presented to him, and I said, you know, of course it didn't happen like that. And he said, that's what I expected. You know, of course it had been distorted. But then he gave me two pieces. Well, then I said, well, I first said, I resign. I remove myself from the public view because I'm tired of this. And let's see, then he said to me, of course, you have to think not only of what you might say, but also of what people are ready to hear. Which, of course, the only word I can think of is duh. Of course you have to think like that. But then much more importantly, what he said to me is, we cannot control how other people respond to us because they are responding from their own complex karmic pattern. And it may have actually nothing to do with you. You simply cannot control how people will respond. Obviously, you should use your brain and do the best you can and love and be appropriate, but you can't control it. You're only responsible for your intention. And so that from that experience, that's what I always think of. It seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, even if in retrospect, I could have been wiser, but I couldn't have been wiser because that wasn't who I was. I was responding from my own complex pattern. We spend, as Swamiji says, it's bad enough when you make an error in judgment. Don't compound it by having a complex about it. Oh, I made an error in judgment. I made an error in judgment. How could I make an error in judgment? This woman friend of mine, she did something it was a grave error in judgment. And it caused Swami Kriyananda a great deal of difficulty. It took him a good bit of effort to sort the thing out once she'd started the avalanche down the hill. And about 2 weeks later, she was still moping about. And Swamiji finally said to her, you know, why are you in such a bad mood? Oh, she said, I just did that thing and it caused so much trouble and so much people had a problem. He said, what egotism? And she got a little irate. She said, you know, I'm not proud, I'm ashamed. How dare you accuse me of being egoic? And he said, because you're so shocked that you could make a mistake, that 2 weeks later you're still worshiping it. That's how he put it. Now, isn't that interesting? Because of the fundamental lack of self-acceptance. You know, she just was trying to be Jesus Christ, and she wasn't. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I meant well, or maybe I meant evil, but now I would not do it again. You know, it seemed like a good idea at the time to behave badly. But then we can just come to peace with things. This is the way it is. You know, you don't want to carry it to the next incarnation. That's why death stories are often really important. My friend got sober. She got on the spiritual path. She recognized she'd done the best she could, given who she was. And I was I was honestly astonished and profoundly impressed. She wasn't just at peace, she was in a state of joy, even though the result of all her actions had been so unfortunate for the babies that she birthed. But nonetheless, this is who I was, this is what I've done, and I don't want to worship it for the rest of time. Let me just be at peace. Okay, do we understand that? It's not that everything is perfect in an external sense, but that we have accepted reality as it is, and once we accept reality, you see, you can build on that. If you're always at war with what is, you have no foundation on which to build anything else. You have no solid ground on which to stand. Whatever the truth is, be at peace with it. And then we can build from that. Okay?
This chant of Yogananda's, in the temple of silence, in the temple of peace. It's also the chant of his that has the biggest vocal range, 2 octaves. So really low and really high. So do your best for who you are. I'll do the same. In the temple of silence, in the temple of peace, in the temple of silence, in the temple of peace, I will meet thee, I will touch thee, I will love thee, and coax thee to my altar of peace, and coax thee to my altar of peace. In the temple of samadhi, in the temple of bliss, in the temple of samadhi, in the temple of bliss, I will meet thee, I will touch thee, I will love thee, and coax thee to my altar of bliss, and coax thee to my altar of bliss. In the temple of silence, in the temple of peace, in the temple of silence, in the temple of peace, I will meet thee, I will touch thee, I will love thee, and coax thee to my altar of peace, and coax thee to my altar of peace. In the temple of samadhi, in the temple of bliss, in the temple of samadhi, in the temple of bliss, I will meet thee, I will touch thee, I will love thee, and coax thee to my altar of bliss, and coax thee to my altar of bliss. In the temple of silence, in the temple of peace, in the temple of silence, in the temple of peace, I will meet thee, I will touch thee, I will love thee, and coax thee to my altar of peace, and coax thee to my altar of peace, and coax thee to my altar of peace, and coax thee to my altar of peace. You've got to roll again in this one. That's just to sing the last line in each verse. Amen, amen. Peace gave us the mountains, peace gave us the sky. Nightly when starlight enfolds us, peace is its lullaby. Amen. Amen. Peace gave us the morning, peace gave us the sun, bird songs that call us to welcome day and fresh labors begun. Amen. Amen. Peace gave us the seasons, peace gave us the rain, cool clouds that gather to bless us, mist hands that soothe away pain. Amen. Amen. Peace gave us our heart's love, peace gave us our smiles, rays of God's presence within us, light that all strife reconciles. Amen. Amen.